Okay.
Awesome. So yeah, I mean, we're super lucky to have Victor Shoup here today, giving his talk that he gave recently at SBC. But Victor, please take it away.
Okay, so I guess I'll skip this slide and that slide. Everybody knows what consensus is. So we have the usual thing, right? So I won't bother with that. Is that fair? Yes. Okay. So if you watched my talk that Sam posted, I'll try to start out with something a little bit different, which I don't think I included in that talk. I'm not sure. So if I did, it was like an epilogue, but I don't think I had time for that. So now I'm going to start with it as a prologue with some opinionated ideas that are maybe controversial, but I think it's more interesting. So let me start out with a rant on leader-based versus leaderless protocols. So leader-based protocols have long been recognized as having a bandwidth bottleneck at the leader. You have typically one leader that may be rotating, maybe not, but is trying to push out these blocks to all of the committee members on the consensus committee, and that itself can become a huge bottleneck. So the leader has to transmit a block to all parties somehow, and this I myself started like reading about this some years ago in the Honey Badger paper, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. They actually did some empirical studies and focusing on throughput and latency, but from the throughput point of view, like the leader bottleneck really can become a huge problem from a throughput standpoint. There's another paper that seemed to have got less press, this Mir BFT protocol. They also recognized this problem. They came up with a very different kind of solution, but they certainly like documented with empirical evidence that this problem exists. And then, there's been this whole interest in DAG-based protocols, and if you read through many of the papers, they usually start out with some blurb about why DAGs are cool, and they start out by bashing leader-based protocols. They're fundamentally bottlenecked in throughput by the bandwidth and processing capacity of a single replica. Ignoring processing capacity, they're again identifying the network bandwidth as a bottleneck for the leader. But all of this is false. The leader bandwidth bottleneck can be eliminating using balanced information dispersals techniques. This has been discussed well in this little paper I wrote on DispersedSimplex+Kudzu. And even if you go to Kudzu, it's Solana's new up and coming consensus protocol. But even if you look at Solana's old and current protocol, they also use erasure coding and information dispersal techniques to get rid of this bottleneck. So it's kind of like not a problem. And DAG-based protocols also have their drawbacks. So by solving a non-problem, they introduce new problems that leader-based protocols don't have. You get suboptimal latency. You also get this phenomenon that, if you're familiar with these DAG-based protocols, right? Every node in the network is proposing a set of transactions, and then and they're proposing them at a point in time where they don't even know what the previous kind of block was. And then all of these things get collected, and at some later time, a block is formed from these things. And so the proposals that are being made can't be based on full information about what the most profitable transactions to submit are. And so not only is it kind of an MEV problem, but it's also can also undo all of the benefits that DAG-based protocols were supposed to have in terms of communication utilization, namely that if you're not careful, and there's been some work on this, but you might just end up duplicating transactions anyway. So any gain you had is going to be lost. But again, this is opinionated. I know there's work on all of this stuff. I also want to say, there's this at the same place that I gave my talk this summer at this workshop. There was also a presentation by these folks who had these pipes model Kartik Nayak and some others wrote this paper where they really tried to take into account in a methodical and quantitative way, taking into account bandwidth limitations and ordinary latency and how that translates into throughput limitations, and then really looked at how that if you compare something like DispersedSimplex to state-of-the-art DAG-based protocol, how those things really compare. And the upshot was actually kind of simple. I should have put together a slide on this all. So this is not my talk. That up to a certain throughput level, okay, so for both DAG-based protocols and something like DispersedSimplex, you can push the throughput higher and higher, but at some point they both fall off a cliff. That cliff is further out for these other protocols, but before you reach is a little bit further out by a small constant factor, 2 or 3, for the DAG-based protocols. But before you reach that cliff, the actual performance of the DispersedSimplex type protocols are actually much better. But that's their paper, not mine. And it would have been nice for me to actually prepare a nice summary slide of those things. It's an interesting thing to look at, though. So you can look it up. This Pipes paper. Kartik Nayak is one of the co-authors, so you can certainly maybe take a look there if you're interested. Okay, so that's one of my rants. So Eddie, should I stop for questions along the way? I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
I dropped a link in the chat as well to that paper. Yeah.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we can take a few. I don't know. I think it would be good, interesting to have questions. Maybe dumb questions. I've heard of this pipes paper a few times now. I haven't actually even read the abstract yet. But what does the pipes actually mean? Like, what?
Pipes mean you push data through pipes, right? And so these pipes have capacity. It's basically just doing kind of the obvious thing. If you're saying, well, you have some data transmission speed, one gigabit per second or whatever it is that you're trying to push out, and so the total time to transmit is the time it takes to push the bits onto the wire, and then the latency it takes to actually, for these bits to appear at a recipient, right? And so, a lot of theory papers, I think, in this area just kind of assume that you have, they talk about bandwidth as an issue, but kind of only as a qualitative, say, oh, okay, well, this is the communication complexity of this protocol. And that's one thing. And then they also say, and maybe they say what that is, and then maybe they say, oh, and the latency is 2 delta or 3 delta, right? And they don't really talk about the interplay between these two things. You're really interested in, what is the throughput and what is the latency? And this pipes model tries to get a unified model of latency and throughput where you take both of these quantities into account. Because the bandwidth limitation can lead to higher latencies as well. And then, yeah, so definitely worth taking a look. That's my rant number 1. This is my rant number 2. It's a rant on linear communication complexity. So many papers in the literature, from theory to practice in any kind of distributed system, they'll define communication complexity, right? And they'll define it traditionally. The way the theoreticians defined this years ago was usually you look at the total number of bits sent by all parties. To all other parties, or at least the total number of bits sent by honest parties to all other honest parties. So it's the sum over all ij of the number of bits sent from party I to party j over the protocol. And so that's one way to define communication complexity. And much effort has been spent on reducing the communication complexity of many protocols, including consensus protocols like hot stuff, SBFT. And so they focus in on this all-to-all communication pattern that you see in PBFT protocols, where everybody votes, right? And they broadcast their vote to everybody. So you get this natural n-squared communication complexity for protocols like PBFT, and a lot of work has been spent, and I would say this is my opinion, misspent maybe, trying to reduce that communication to linear, by doing things like having, one party broadcast something and then another party just collect it. Instead of having all to all, you have one to many and many to one. But two things. One is, this doesn't even address the real challenge of block dissemination. I mean, it kind of depends on what size problem you're looking at. If you're looking at networks of size a few dozen to a few hundred, this n-squared voting stuff is not going to add up to very much compared to the cost of trying to transmit megabyte blocks. If we're talking about 100,000 nodes, then okay, yeah, n-squared starts to become problematic. So they don't even address this real challenge. So unless you take into account the cost of transmitting these blocks, that's going to be the dominant cost anyway. And so it hardly seems worthwhile to introduce, new latencies. All of these protocols generally have worse latencies than the PBFT style protocols. And again, it's been shown, like this Honey Badger paper, they looked at hot stuff, and even though they were looking at a purely asynchronous protocol that naturally had very high latency, it had much better throughput than hot stuff did, because they still didn't solve the block dissemination problem at all. So that if you take into account the cost of block dissemination, and I think people naturally see this, that a more useful measure of communication complexity is kind of the infinity norm. You just look at you just ask, how many bits does every party dump on the network, and that kind of unless if you're talking a wide area network, that's kind of the natural thing, right? Because you add a new party to a wide area network, they're not competing for the same resources for the most part. They're just limited by their own bandwidth in their own data center, right? So if you're a local area network, okay, that's a different story, but yeah. So anyway, this measure also characterizes the bandwidth bottleneck at the leader, or at every node, really. So so this one norm might be more meaningful. The one norm might be more meaningful in the local area network, but the infinity norm is more meaningful over a wide area network. And what you want to do if you're using the infinity norm is to use balanced communication patterns, right? So that every party is transmitting the same amount of data instead of having it all bunched up at a leader. Okay, so those are my two rants. Now I'll actually talk about Simplex and so on, but I wanted to get that more kind of opinionated stuff out there. Okay, so we want optimal resilience, meaning we have n parties and less than a third of them are corrupt, right? So, and we're also working here in the partial synchrony model. So in a nutshell, we want liveness during periods of synchrony, and we always want safety without any synchrony assumptions. And then, so these are the three papers I'm going to talk about super quickly to highlight the main ideas. Starting out with the Simplex protocol of Chan and Pass from 23. Why is it 1/3 rather than a half? There are, in the asynchronous or even in the partially synchronous model, there are lower bounds that tell you that you can't actually do any better than that. To get 1/2, you have to assume really sharp bounds on what the latencies are. Simplex, I love it. It's simple. It has optimal latency. I don't like it. It's not ideal in the sense that its communication complexity is not that great. Okay, two things I want to say there. One is, if you take the paper too literally, the communication complexity is ridiculous because every node has to transmit the entire blockchain in every round, which nobody would ever do. And the authors know this, and they don't really mean it, but they don't actually give a detailed protocol that says what exactly you're supposed to do to prevent that and still have all of their proofs of correctness hold. But then even then, they don't really tackle the, it's a leader-based protocol, so they're going to have leader bottlenecks if they don't do something about that. So but I love the protocol and I really got excited about it. So I just started, I wrote it started out as a short note and then it kind of like got very long over a period of time. So I talked about some various implementation ideas and optimizations of Simplex where you get much better communication complexity. Specifically, it's balanced, and you get much better communication complexity, completely eliminating the leader bottleneck without incurring any extra cost in terms of latency. So it has the exact same latency as Simplex itself. So there's no leader bottleneck, and you get high throughput with a low latency, even for fairly large committees. And then more recently, I worked with a couple of folks who are with Solana or affiliated with Solana. They wanted to take these ideas from Simplex and DispersedSimplex specifically and update and add what's called a fast path. So what is a fast path? It adds an optimistic fast path at the expense of optimal resilience. So if we weaken this assumption up here a little bit on the number of corrupt parties, you can get better latency under somewhat optimistic conditions. So instead of, I'll go through all this later, but instead of 3 delta latency, which all protocols going back to PBFT, most of them have, you can reduce it to 2 delta latency under highly optimistic conditions. And I'll talk about what those are, and it'll become clear. I think instead of trying to like define the problem abstractly, you'll see what it is that we want to do when we actually look at some protocols. And all of these protocols kind of build on each other. So I'll walk you through the basic ideas of Simplex, then what changes to get DispersedSimplex, and then what the differences are in Kudzu at a high level. So the easiest way to think about Simplex, I think, is a lot of protocols, right? Is blockchain protocols is as a graph. You have a graph of blocks. So here's a block that everybody has kind of notarized. You have signatures on it, so everybody agrees it's kind of a correct block, but you haven't agreed that it's really going to be on the blockchain, finalized on the blockchain as yet. Say this one you have though. So this green triangle means represents a finality certificate. So this block has been finalized. Before you get a finality certificate, you start out with a block certificate, which just says it's a valid block. And you'll see that there can be at most 1 valid block, but we don't know yet if everybody's really agreed to put it finalized on the blockchain. So what can happen is, so we have slots or rounds or views, whatever you want to call them. So in the next rounds, or the next view or slots, some leader proposes a block, and then just by writing in here in this rectangle 4, that means it has a block certificate associated with it, but it's not yet finalized. Okay, so what can happen is, and I'll go into the details of this in a minute. So say this block gets added to the blockchain, but it's not finalized yet, so we don't really know if it's going to be included in the final sequence. Say the next slot comes along and there's another leader, and say he's crashed, so he doesn't even like propose a block, or something else goes wrong, and after a short period of time, everybody gives up and complains, and what's called a timeout certificate forms, which is just a certificate. It's just a quorum of signatures that says, yeah, we're timing out here. I'm having some issues here. So then in the next slot, somebody else proposes the block and it gets certified. One of the rules of, this is one of the important things, one of the rules of Simplex is that if you propose a block, you see here I proposed a block and it builds on this block from the previous slot. Here, I'm proposing a block that's actually skipping a slot. Yeah, and you're allowed to do this. I mean, sometimes you're going to have to because there was no block there, right? But you're allowed to do that only if there's a timeout certificate. So, and the property of Simplex is that, if I propose, I'm a nice guy and I'm proposing this block, I see this timeout certificate, so I'm going to skip that slot and build my next block on top of this one, right? And I'm not going to broadcast this timeout certificate. the protocol is already designed so that if I see a broadcast a timeout certificate, everybody will very quickly see that timeout certificate if they haven't already. So I'm gonna, and so if you're validating this block before you even vote to certify this block, you're also going to see, oh, he's skipping this slot. I'm only going to vote for it to certify it if I see this timeout certificate as well. So you're only allowed to jump over slots that have timeout certificates in them. And then say in the next rounds, there could be the case that there's both a certified block and a timeout certificate in the same round. It could happen as we go in. I'll go in a minute into the round structure, the slot structure in more detail. You see, it's like you can't really avoid it. And in my picture here on the next slot, I'm going to have, say, this guy is going to skip over both these slots, and he can do that because we have timeout certificates for both of those slots. And then say what happens is, finally, in this slot, we get a finality certificate that says everybody agrees this slot is finalized. And what happens is everything on all of its predecessors become implicitly finalized as well. So this guy was already finalized. He had an explicit finality certificate. This guy skips over these two slots but comes back here. And even though a finality certificate didn't necessarily form for this block, it's implicitly finalized due to this explicit finalization that you get from a finality certificate. So that's like the high level structure of Simplex, but I haven't talked about what actually happens in each slot, and that's what I'm going to do next. So there's kind of 3 rounds per slot, even though, as you'll see, slots overlap a little bit. There's some natural pipelining that happens inside Simplex. So in the first round within a slot, the leader for that slot is going to propose a block. So he'll just send that block to everybody. In the second round, it's a voting round. So once each party receives a block from their leader, they'll vote to certify it if it's valid. If, of course, the leader, if they see 2 blocks, they're not going to vote for 2 blocks. And also that skip rule they check here, that if that block is building on something that wasn't from the previous slot, then all the intervening timeout certificates have to be present for any party to vote for that. So that's the skip rule. And now, eventually all parties will move on to the next slot when they either see a block certificate or a timeout certificate. So when any party enters a slot, they're going to start a timer running, and if that block times out at some point in time before they've seen a certified block, they're going to vote for a timeout. So one way or the other, they're going to get out of the slot, because eventually either they'll see a timeout certificate, and but if they don't, eventually everybody will be voting for to timeout. And it's a fact that the way the protocol is designed too, if anybody sees a certified block, all parties will see the certified block. And if anybody sees a timeout certificate, all parties will see a timeout certificate. Now, so that's when the slot ends, and a new slot will start, but there's some pipelining or overlapping going on here. So when you leave the slot, you leave because either you've seen this or this. But if you and you'll vote, say you leave the slot because you see a certified block. Now you may have actually voted for a timeout. You might not have seen a timeout certificate, but maybe you voted for a block, and you may have voted for a block. You may have voted for a timeout. Now you see a block certificate. So the rule for voting for finality is simply going to be you didn't vote for. If you see a certified block and you did not vote for a timeout, then you will vote to finalize that block. Again, if you see a certified block, you're going to exit the slot. And if at that instant in time you had not voted for a timeout, you will vote to finalize the block. And the key property is that you cannot have a finalization certificate and a timeout certificate ever form in the same slot. And that's because of and that's because of this rule. So the rule here that you only vote for finality if you didn't vote to, so nobody's going to vote for finality and for a timeout, right? There's no honest party will ever vote to finalize a block and to time out the slot. And by standard quorum intersection arguments, that means you can't get both a finalization certificate and a timeout certificate forming in the same slot. And this fact, together with this skip rule up here, implies safety. Because if somebody finalizes a block in a certain slot, nobody's ever going to be able to propose a block that skips around it. Yeah, you'll never have this situation. You'll never have, like, remember, there's this rule that you're allowed to skip a slot if there was a timeout certificate, right? If you do skip a slot, there has to be a timeout certificate. But the existence of a timeout certificate means you cannot have a finalized block there. And that's the key to safety, because once a block is finalized, nobody can skip over it. So if you could skip over a finalized block, then you would have, like, that would blow your safety. But this is the key to safety. I mean, yeah, you have to prove lemmas and theorems and so on and so forth, but that's like the essence of it. DispersedSimplex just adds standard data dispersal, and it does so in a way that a little bit careful so that you don't add any extra round complexity to it. So in DispersedSimplex, what you're going to do is the leader is going to erase your code, the payload that he wants to send out. Say the payload data is some megabyte block D, and he chops that up into fragments, F1 through Fn, one for every party. And the proposal message now that he sends includes just the fragment number I. So he sends party I, fragment number I. Yeah, so he's sending out one fragment to each party instead of sending out a whole block to each party. And then when a party votes to certify a block, they just they vote on kind of a Merkle root for you. There's actually a detail here, is that there's like a Merkle tree with leaves containing the fragments, and there's a Merkle root. So all of the voting and finalization is really on that Merkle root. So but the party's vote is going to be a vote on that Merkle root, and it's going to include his fragment there. So that means that everybody, if a certificate, if a block certificate forms, that means many honest parties have voted to certify it, which means they've also broadcast their fragments, which means all these fragments are flying through the network. So everybody will be able to collect enough fragments eventually to reconstruct the block. So if a block is certified, then D can be reconstructed in the voting round. So by the time this voting round ends, the same kind of overall latency of 2 delta, basically, everybody will also have reconstructed D. And at that point, then you actually look at the block. So the thing is, you're voting blind, but that's okay. But you're only going to vote to finalize the block once you see that it's actually a valid extension of the block it built on. I mean, some people complain here that, well, you're voting blind, but don't take it to, I mean, this voting is just an artifact of the protocol. The point is, you're not going to ever add an invalid block to the blockchain. That's all that really matters. So each party.
Quick question, Victor.
Yes, go ahead. Sure.
When you say voting blind, you mean that you basically, like, you don't have for example, in EigenDA, we have a KZG proof that you could, that the shards basically belong to some commitment. You're just saying that. you don't
Right.
have.
Well, voting blind, I mean, you don't know what the block is yet because you just see a shard, right? So you're voting to certify before you actually know the contents of the block because you're just seeing a shard, right? Second thing is, unlike what you guys do, right? So, and is used elsewhere, there's no need in this protocol to have proofs of a valid shard. Like that's just unnecessary, and it makes the data encoding and decoding much more efficient because you can just use lightning fast erasure codes for this stuff. By the way, one of the things when I was working on this paper was, I was thinking, is all this erasure coding like practical? And the KZG stuff is not so practical. I mean, that doesn't scale very well. But if you haven't heard about this, there's this really amazing. There's been a lot of work done. The area of Reed-Solomon erasure coding has like changed so much in the last 10 years, I would say. There's been a few new papers that talk about the theory of how to do it, and then there's been a few iterations on GitHub of projects that do this. So it's called SIMD Reed-Solomon or Reed-Solomon SIMD or something like this. If you look in the DispersedSimplex paper, there's a citation to it. It's like it runs faster than your network. So I mean, you can encode and decode faster than your typical network speed. So there's like no reason just not to do it. But if you use the KZG approach, I haven't benchmarked that, but I'm sure that's going to be like a lot slower. And it turns out you don't need to do any of that proving, depending on the application. But yeah. And then finally, Kudzu. So what is Kudzu trying to achieve? So with DispersedSimplex, we've eliminated the leader bottleneck, and we've done so without adding any additional latency. Now we want to reduce the latency, right? So, and by that I mean the following. So right now, right, from the time that the leader proposes, you have 3 network hops to finalize, right? Because you have to vote here to finalize, and then only after that you collect enough votes do you know that you can actually treat the block as finalized. But the idea, and it's not new to Kudzu, other papers have done this over the year. Many of them, it's a fraught area though. Many of these papers have turned out to have bugs in them and so on, and be like extremely complicated. We kind of feel like Kudzu is like really simple. So just like Simplex is simple, Kudzu is pretty simple. It's not as simple as Simplex, but so the idea is this. We have this voting round where we vote to certify a block. What if almost everybody, what if you collect, here you're supposed to collect something like 2/3 N votes to treat a block as certified, right? And then you have a separate round of finalization of votes. What if you get I don't know, N-3 votes to certify, like almost everybody is in agreement to certify this block. Can you just treat that as an implicit finalization? And the answer is no. But that's the hope anyway. And I'll talk about why it doesn't work and how you can fix it. So, but the idea is, that's the idea though. We could under optimistic conditions, when almost all parties or a larger majority of parties are honest, and the network is well behaved, we can finalize after just this one vote round. We don't need this extra round.
I think
but there's a problem.
There's a question from Mikael in the chat. I think it's related to when in this pipeline do you have the full block so that you can pass it on to an execution layer?
Execution stage, right? So here, you would only That's maybe a fair criticism. So yeah. So in ordinary Simplex, you would have the block here already, and you could start executing it then. Yeah. Here, you would in DispersedSimplex and also Kudzu, you might only have it here after two rounds. That could be a valid, so there's maybe of course here you'd have to do speculative execution, right? In fact, in all cases, if you don't wait to finalize, you're doing some kind of speculative execution, right? which may or may not waste resources. I don't know. So there are trade-offs there, right? Here, if you insist on having the block ready to execute after this first round, just the proposal round, that's great. But then, of course, you're facing that big communication bottleneck by attempting to do that. So yeah, so there are really some trade-offs there. Here, if you wait to here to do it, then yeah, then you don't have that your bottleneck. So so I guess you'd have to look at the actual numbers, right, to see like which led to better latency and throughput altogether, right? Yeah, but that's a good point.
It's actually interesting. It made me realize that even if you want to scale the throughput past a single leader, either you do what you're proposing is you keep a single leader and you will kind of create these shards. I mean, just like encode the data, or you'll go to these other structures like Autobahn or DAGs or whatnot, where you let everyone propose blocks. But in any case, you don't have the full data, right? So you always
in Autobahn or DAG, you also have, it's even worse, right? It's because you don't even get 2 delta latency. It's 3 or more. I'm not sure but you can't start executing until even later in the pipeline. So I'm not sure if there's anything there. So with this idea of adding a fast path, right? What goes wrong? Well, I told you before that you can get a block certificate and you can get a timeout certificate both in one round, right? And just because you got a fast finality certificate is really just a beefed up one of these, right? So a block certificate. So there's no, at least out of the box, like you might have a safety violation here, right? Without further reasoning. And in fact, it's possible, right? So what could happen is everybody votes to certify, and then all these messages get delayed, and then while everybody's waiting to see anything, everybody votes to timeout. So now you have n certify votes and n timeout votes. So you can get and then if you receive those n timeout votes, you might finalize that block, even though some parties, including the next leader, might see these n votes here to timeout, and then he has the right to skip that block that you just finalized. So that's kind of the tension here. Hopefully that I think that's like the most useful thing to appreciate is like what is the problem here of adding this fast path, and that's kind of like the problem. So here's a solution that almost works but not quite. In this round here, what if you only vote for a block certificate or a timeout but not both? Well, that would solve the safety problem, but then of course it creates a liveness problem, because once I vote for I get a block and I vote for it, but maybe I'm the only person who received this block for all I know, and I voted for it, and now I can't timeout. So now, who knows how many people are going to, so now you're not guaranteed that everybody is going to vote to timeout eventually. So that breaks liveness. Okay, but maybe there's a solution. So the solution is to cast secondary votes. So we allow, just to get out of this jam. So we are going to create this liveness violation by having this rule that you only vote for a block certificate or a timeout. That created a liveness problem. We're going to fix the liveness problem just in this peculiar, this is not the normal case that you'll be in. But if you get into a jam like that, you do have, you can cast a secondary vote. And this is where the details get a little bit messy, so I'll just like highlight the idea. So I've done my vote up here, right? And that was supposed to be all I have to do. But now to get unstuck, I might have to do something a little bit more. If I see many votes for some block, I will jump on the bandwagon and vote for that block too. And here it's with the dispersed simplex stuff too. You have to be. If you see many votes for a block, actually you'll be able to reconstruct the block Right? This might not be the block. I might not have voted for a block, or I maybe haven't voted for a different block in this first round of voting. In the second round of voting, I'll have to, just as always, include a fragment. So I'll reconstruct the second block that a lot of people seem to like. I'll like it too. I can even like reconstruct the data for that block and broadcast my shard as well. And then the other thing is, so that's like the jump on a bandwagon rule. If many people are voting for one block, maybe that's the block I should support too, to kind of get us all moving out of the slot together. The idea is that, and you have to work out the logic of this, everybody will eventually jump on the same bandwagon and we'll get out of the slot with a certified block. Or in collecting these first votes of timeouts or first certification votes, I might see like a crazy diversity of votes. It certainly means that one thing is for sure, it means that the leader is equivocating right now because there's like votes for different blocks. So if I see votes for several blocks, I'll vote for a timeout. So now you still have to like argue that. So that's the high level, super high level idea. The second round of voting is only going to happen under weird circumstances. On the normal path, you'll just be like flying through like regular dispersed simplex, and if you have, or on the optimistic path, you'll even finish quicker. So Kudzu is simple like simplex. It has optimal latency like simplex. So you always finish in 3 delta no matter what, as long as just your normal assumptions like the leader is honest and the network is well behaved, the network latency is well behaved. It has good balanced communications complexity like dispersed simplex. So each party is going to transmit the same small number of bits independent of the size of the committee. It adds a fast path. So here's like this precise statement, and I realize I went over time as usual, but there's a second parameter P you can choose. So F is the bound on the number of failures. So if you add some extra redundancy, and you can pick this P any number you want up to F. I mean, it doesn't make sense to make it more than F really. So, but you can make it smaller than F. So if N is of this size, then what we can say is the following. If fewer than P parties are actually corrupt and the network is well behaved, you'll actually finalize in time 2 delta. Otherwise, just like ordinary simplex, you'll finalize in time 3 delta. So the nice thing is the fast path and the normal path run concurrently. So if the fast path fails, it doesn't mean like you have to like start now at the slower path that runs for time 3 delta. The max is 3 delta, and hopefully it'll be 2 delta under optimistic settings. So this heavily influenced the design of Solana's Alpenglow protocol, which I mentioned, and that's it. Okay, so I went for way too long.
No, I think this was amazing.
Now we can chat, and I'll still be interested in, like, I maybe sometimes my perspective is a bit too theoretical, but I try to understand all of what these practical matters are, and if anything, if I'm missing something that's of practical importance, that would be fine. But then my goal would be to like, so how do we quantify that and like actually analyze that and reason about it, instead of just stroking our beards and saying there are practical considerations, Dr. Shoup, that you're not taking into account here, and you don't understand. So I'll be happy for that kind of feedback too. So there's no possibility for optimistic. Oh, okay. That was we talked about that already.
Yeah. Okay. How do we? I know some people in the audience have questions. We can just get like anyone, please. Otherwise, I'm going to start picking up people that I know have questions. All right, Matthias, let's go.
Hi, Victor. Thank you so much for the talk. About these secondary votes, you said that once a validator committed to a block, but then sees that another block gets a lot of votes, they can cast a secondary vote.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an exact number, like how much is how many, or is?
Oh yeah, no, yeah. I was being like just hand wavy, but like this, it's actually quite, it's simple but delicate. I have a whole bunch of slides with the details, but we can look at those later. But we can do a breadth first search for now. But yeah, it's very like it's simple but precise and yeah.
Okay,
It's
I have a
actually f+1. So if you see f+1, which is kind of like the minimum you could do anyway, because you have to be we're doing reconstruction. The erasure code needs f+1 shards to reconstruct. So and you need that to if you're going to cast a vote for a different block. And then one thing also that happens, I didn't say this, but in ordinary simplex and dispersed simplex, you can only get one certified block per slot at most, because every party votes for at most one votes to certify at most one block, and so by quorum intersection rules, you can't get two certified blocks. In Kudzu, you can actually get I think 3 certified blocks. Of course, at that point, the leader is clearly equivocating, and you can slash and punish and whatever you want to do to the leader, but it can happen. But it's still bounded in that way. It's in worst case like something like 3, I think.
and Nitesh in the chat is saying f+p+1. I don't know if
Yeah.
Oh, did I misspoke? Yeah.
Yeah, it's f+p+1, right? Not f+1.
Yeah, you're right. I was thinking.
Is that for the shard reconstruction, or is that for like final?
No, I think it's for both. Yeah, I think so I misspoke. I was thinking of p = 0 in my mind, but you're right. It's I think a shard reconstruction is f+p+1. Yeah, the erasure coding. Yeah, we might as well look at this here, even if we don't look at proofs. The erasure coding is this. The fast finality certificate is n-p first votes. So p is right. So p tells you how many first votes you can miss and still fast finalize, right? An ordinary finality cert is n-f-p, and a block or timeout certificate is actually not n-f, but n-f-p. And then the rule for let's look at this quickly. So here's so these are the usual rules. If you see a certified block, you'll move out. If you see a timeout certificate, you'll move out. If you're a leader, you'll propose. If you haven't first voted yet and you receive a valid block, then you'll cast the first vote for the block. If I haven't received the first vote yet and too much time has passed, then I'll cast a first vote for timeout. Kind of timeout is, you can think of it as a special block. This is the bandwagon rule. If I see f+p+1 first votes for a block, then I'll reconstruct the payload and cast a second vote for B. And I'm talking about first and second votes, but a certificate can be comprised. This is the thing too that I was on the other slide that I won't go back there right now. If you want to certify a block, you can combine first and second votes to get a certificate to certify a block. That's okay. Yeah, that's like when I talk about first and second votes, it's maybe not always clear what the distinction is between them. But you can tell them apart, but you can also combine them in certain circumstances. And then this is the diversity rule. So there's the bandwagon rule, and then there's the diversity rule. If you look at the total number of first votes that you've collected, and you look at the maximum number of first votes that you've seen for any one block, if this difference is big enough, then you'll cast the second vote for timeout. This took figuring out what this inequality was like totally, or what this condition was like the hardest thing about this whole project. Even the fact that it existed, but this is like a simple rule that lets you figure out when it's safe to time out. Remember, You only want to generate, again, you want to avoid the possibility of getting any kind of a fast or slow timeout certificate, no, any kind of fast or slow finalization certificate and a timeout certificate forming in the same slot. So you have to be very careful about these rules. So the rules are very careful, but yet at the end of the day, they're quite simple.
Yes, Patrick.
Go ahead.
Great presentation, as always here. You touched on this briefly when you were discussing like the optimistic proposal setting. I'm curious if you could just elaborate a bit on your thoughts around like optimistic stuff in these sort of mechanisms. Like, I think it's really nice that Simplex has this faster than finality view iteration where you can just wait for this initial certificate to do things like this broadcast or this certificate broadcast versus doing kind of like this out of consensus view iteration that a lot of people try to now accomplish, like the Alpenglow side, and I know Moonshot tries to do a lot of like optimistic proposal stuff. Curious like where you landed on that after all this research.
I mean, the optimistic, you mean like the fast path kind of stuff, or no? What?
Referring more just to the block production prior to having any sort of certificate. So yeah.
Oh, so yeah, right. So in all of these protocols, you have a problem, right? So if I'm let's go back to here, actually. Yeah, this is actually also an interesting issue that comes up in these protocols. Right, so if I'm the leader in this slot, I have to decide which block I'm building on, right? And for that, I really need to know, or so I can. So I'm certainly going to build on a block, even if I don't know if it doesn't have to be finalized, right? That's the nice thing about all of these protocols is that I can, if this guy builds on this block and it hasn't been finalized, that's fine, because if I become finalized, this is going to be the chain, right? So that's not an issue. But as a block builder, as a proposer, I kind of have, maybe I should wait until this block here has been certified, because if I don't, and it's not, and maybe instead of a timeout forms here, I should really skip over it and build on that block. I mean, that becomes an issue, right? And so what Solana does, and also what in my DispersedSimplex paper, what I explored as well, was a variant of Simplex where you have a stable leader. So that's like one way out of this conundrum, right? Is to like have a leader in place for a few slots, at least I don't know. I think Solana does 4. It doesn't even take much, right? If I think you get like 80% of the benefit with much fewer problems if you just have like one proposer in place for a few rounds. And of course that that has its problem, and that because since you're proposing the next block, you know exactly what you're building on, and so you can. So not only that has lots of that has lots of advantages. One is you can start building that block sooner. You don't have to wait, and then you can even start transmitting that block before you even wait to see until you see a certificate out. So that allows even another kind of layer of pipelining, both on the execution side or on the CPU side of doing the block building itself, and then transmitting the block. You can start earlier. Of course, that has downsides as well in terms of fairness and other issues. It has other upsides too, though. I mean, one is if you typically will have like a few crashed nodes in your network, or they're rebooting or offline temporarily or whatever. And if you're switching leaders every round, you're more likely to burn around in trying, you'll hit one of these dead leaders, and then you'll have to do the whole wait until a timeout thing, and you'll get a big bubble in your pipeline. But if you stay on one leader for some rounds, then the fraction of total time that you're getting these bubbles is smaller. But what do you guys think about? I mean, that's one. So this thing about block building. I mean, you could either A, have stable leaders, at least for a few rounds or slots, or you can do speculative, or you could do it speculatively. Once you'll see as soon as you see a block from the previous leader, and even if it hasn't been certified yet, it's probably a pretty good idea to start speculatively building your next block, right? You probably shouldn't start transmitting it though. That might get into that might even get more hairy if you start transmitting it. You might even get into you might start transmitting it, but don't sign anything. Don't attach your signature to anything as yet. I don't know. What do you guys think about these trade-offs of speculative block building versus stable leaders? I mean, I don't know where people come down on in terms of those trade-offs. Those are interesting questions, though.
Yeah. I think the view latency, obviously, of speculative, if you can get it right, is really attractive because you can get it down to like little delta, I guess. If you avoid the consensus certificate production, which let's assume is like a 2 delta proposal to certificate.
Right. You want to start. Yeah, I guess I haven't read. So yeah, what are those papers? Those are some recent papers. I haven't looked at them. So you start transmitting after 1 delta.
You just transmit right away as soon as you have the parent block. And so if you assume the proposal time right is 0, then the next one is, I think, is Nebraska on this call? I kind of saw his name. Yeah, there you go.
So
you're better to describe what you guys came to. Yeah.
Yeah, so we propose as soon as we receive the parent block, but while porting, we wait for the parent to be certified, right?
You wait for the parent to be certified
before porting, right? So that allows the children block to be propagated in parallel while waiting for the parent block to be certified, right? So there's some parallel thing going on.
Right. So when does the leader propose?
So the leader proposes as soon as it hears the parent block, right?
As soon as it sees the parent block, even though the parent block is not yet certified.
Right, but the porters, they only port if the parent block is certified.
Yes. That, of course, that makes sense. But what happens to that proposer's block if the parent block doesn't end up being certified?
Yeah, then we have the leader who sends the optimistic proposal. He has to send another proposal as a fallback mechanism to ensure that he proposes at least 1 block that gets certified.
I see. Okay. Well, what's interesting though is that I see. So I see. So right, I think I saw a talk recently. I think that addressed what's the name of your protocol again?
Moonshot.
Moonshot?
And we also have this Hydrangea plus that uses this optimization.
Which protocol?
Moonshot and Hydrangea plus.
Oh, Hydrangea does this too?
No, Hydrangea plus does this.
Oh, plus. Okay, got it. Okay, I haven't seen that one yet. I heard about Moonshot, though I haven't looked into all the details of it. I guess one thing is that I guess again it depends, right? If you in something like Moonshot, you're gonna let's see. So you propose, and so if you believe my story about data dissemination techniques are important to get high throughput, then is there a world in which this Moonshot idea and data dissemination can play together well? I mean, it seems like in what I'm proposing here, what I'm talking about here, you propose and then you vote, but actually these 2 rounds are also being used for balanced data dissemination, which gives you the higher throughput that you get for balanced data dissemination. So I don't see how you could possibly, if you're going to do data dissemination like this, I don't know how something like Moonshot could even fit in there, because I won't be able to even assemble the parent block. I won't even be able to assemble the parent block in less than 2 delta time.
We still know the parent hash, right? And before porting, they will know the parent.
Yes. I know the parent hash. Am I willing? Okay, that's fair. But then, am I willing to build on a parent block whose payload I haven't even seen yet, that's also problematic, right? I'm just saying, like, is there a way, like, because then I would have to propose a block. Yes, I can propose a block. Just if I see the Merkle tree root or whatever, or the hash of the previous block, the parent block, but that I can do. But then I'm kind of building my block blind, right? I don't even know what the payload of the parent block is.
Yeah, even here we are doing like, I mean, we are porting blindly, right? So it's kind of similar.
In Moonshot?
No, I mean, in Kudzu, we are porting blindly, right? So,
No. Well, that's because no. Okay. First of all, you're just ascribing too much meaning to the word vote. The voting is just something you do to make the protocol work. But I'm voting blindly. But again, in the start of the next slot, I'm only going to propose after I see. I'm only going to at least the way I'm describing the protocol here. You're only going to propose once you have a notarized block, and also once you have seen the parent block payload. You're not going to vote. You're not going to propose. By proposing blindly, I literally mean, proposing a next block without knowing what the contents of the parent block are, right? Because
right.
Yeah, so that's a little bit different. I mean, so Moonshot makes sense when you in a setting where I don't know. I mean, if I want to be critical, it might only make sense in settings where you don't need data dissemination techniques to achieve the throughput that you want to achieve. So you're getting better. Well, you're getting 2x the throughput by just having faster block times, right? Maybe, but then you're losing any benefit that you might get from these data dissemination techniques, which seem to have a natural 2-round latency. So I don't know if that's an inherent trade-off or there's some trick that I'd be missing to see how you could hope to do better to get the benefits of the best of both worlds. That would be interesting.
The rationale for bringing this up, I think, is that a lot of the conversations I've had in practice have boiled down to, well, 99.9% of the time, like the proposers aren't equivocating. They are sending the data around. And so we're paying this price. And so maybe we should be more blindly optimistic and try to penalize rather than being robust. I fall on the path of the robust side. I like the certificates and I like using that as kind of our foundation. But that was my question is kind of along the lines of like, should we be blindly optimistic if most of the time it's all good, and then just try to recover in those handful of cases if it means that the latency goes down?
I think that makes sense, and you can certainly try to argue both sides. But what I'm pointing out is that there seems to be an inherent challenge, even if you wanted to be even if you want to be pragmatic and just 99.9% of the time, dealers don't equivocate, so just leaders don't equivocate, so just propose when you see it. But what I'm saying is, yes, that's fine, but then you can't. It doesn't seem. This is where I may be mistaken, but it doesn't. It seems to me that can't work in a world where you want to use balanced data dissemination for large blocks. That anyway takes 2 rounds.
You blindly, I agree. That definitely takes 2 rounds. I think what I've seen people do is then they blindly disseminate the shards at the same time. So like here,
that would be, okay, so fine. You could potentially, let's see. So you're saying potentially
leader sends something out, and then like,
all I get is a shard and a Merkle root.
And I'm like, great, this is the first one I got. I'm going to send it again.
You're right. I could propose right then, but then I am proposing blindly.
For sure.
For sure you're
resending that piece.
The next leader the full block instead of sharding, right? So that solves the problem, right?
Say again.
So the leader sends the next leader the full block instead of doing this sharding, right? So that doesn't blow
sharding. You can't. Nobody can send full anything anywhere. I mean, this is too expensive.
It doesn't blow up by a lot, right? This maybe so one leader next leader it sends the full block, but for others it sends the shards, right? if that is the case, then like it's not blowing up much in terms of
No,
communication.
but even in the so say in the common case, if I want to do data sharding in the common case, I'm going to have at this time I propose the leader sends out a block header that has a Merkle root in it and shards to everybody. So here everybody receives that, and now the next leader is going to propose a block now too, but he's only going to do that looking back at the full block data that he's collected here. By this point in time, he's actually, if you're doing sharding, right? By this point in time, he's actually been able to get not only a block certificate, but reconstruct the block itself, right, using the shards. So I mean, it seems to be, if you're gonna it seems like there's some law here that says that if you want to do data sharding to get the higher throughput, you're gonna have to therefore be proposing a block without full information. You can have everything else, but you can't have the very last block. So you're going to be building on top of a head that you don't know yet, but you know 1 minus the head, head minus 1. You do know.
No, but if we send the the full block to the next leader, then the next leader knows it, right?
Oh, to the next leader. Oh. Okay.
So
You're saying just send right, because I'm just saying 1 block to right. I can afford to send up to constants, right? I can just send okay, yeah. So you're saying send shards to everybody else, but the next leader I can send the full block to. Is that what you're saying, Nibesh?
Yeah.
The leader I can send the full block to leader I plus 1, and that he's proposing. Okay. Yeah, that actually should work, actually. Okay, so we need a this for Simplex++ or Kudzu++ now. So this sounds like it should work. So you can get the best of both worlds. Cool. All right.
Cool. So we're waiting for the joint paper next.
Yeah, Nibesh, right? It seems like you should be able to adapt that idea to. I mean, are there other issues that come up? I haven't thought about these optimistic or kind of speculative. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of questions about the speculative, reducing the block time to 1 delta.
Yeah, they do improve the responsiveness of the protocol, and so even Aptos has adopted this technique, and yeah, they have it in production. They call it
who has
Aptos.
it?
Aptos.
Oh, Aptos.
Yeah, so they call it as Velociraptor or something. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Aren't they moving eventually to a DAG-based protocol? I don't know what protocol they're using now.
Yeah, they're using the same simple Jolteon Star, which is a three-round protocol variant of Jolteon.
Parent of what?
Jolteon Star, which is a 3-round variant of Jolteon.
Jolteon, but is this? I'm not familiar. Is it a leader-based protocol?
Yeah, it's a leader-based protocol.
Okay. Jolteon. Okay, I don't know that. I see. So, and then in these protocols, just so I can learn here, do you get I guess you don't get the finalization any faster, right?
The finalization is still 3-round. We just get better block time.
You're just starting a block every round, and well, okay. I guess that leads to, it depends how you measure latency, right? If you measure latency from the time a transaction comes into the mempool to the time it's committed that could save
Yeah,
off.
the final transaction latency does improve by like half or so.
Yeah, I mean, with your protocol, you'd expect an average latency waiting to even be proposed as delta over 2 instead of 2 delta over 2. If your block, whatever your block time is, right? Kind of, you expect to spend on average half of that just waiting to be included in the next proposer's block, right?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it might, let's see. Also trying to think of something else here. It actually might, let's see. It could also, I mean, similar to a stable leader, it could also make better utilization of the overall bandwidth, right? Because in the in DispersedSimplex, what happens is when the proposer proposes, what's happening in that, if you think of it as like an idealistic synchronous process, right? And I don't know how helpful that is, but here you have the proposer sending a single shard to everybody, right? And so very little bandwidth is being utilized during this one round, and then under this delta, right? And then in the second round, everybody is sending shards to everybody, right? So here, all your bandwidth is being utilized. Here, in your proposal, in every round, the proposer is sending out a single shard to every party, while at the same time, everybody else is still echoing the shards of the previous slot, right? Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So that means kind of you're getting like you're squeezing out a little bit more bandwidth utilization. You're getting better bandwidth utilization there too.
Yeah, maybe 2x.
Almost 2x, you're right. So I mean, yeah. So I'm trying to see. Does this mean right? So you're not so I was on the one hand I was thinking, well, if you're proposing a block every delta, maybe you're just going to hit the bandwidth limitations earlier, and the throughput will actually not be any better because you're. But here, actually, it seems like you will get better throughput too. You should be able to get better throughput.
Better
right?
throughput and better latency.
Better throughput and better latency. I see. Have you seen anybody try to do this with a sharded based protocol and combine it?
No.
Okay, so maybe we should try to write something up. Could be interesting. I mean, yeah. So you're saying you avoid the problem. You have the you avoid the voting. You avoid the proposing blind problem by just having this single forwarding thing, which gets tricky, right? Because I suppose there are some. I think this is where things get tricky, right? Where you're forwarding a block to the next proposer, but what do you do in the corner cases when that goes wrong, right? I don't know. I guess there's a lot of corner cases. Like, so I guess we understand fairly well how it works in the common case, but then making sure that it still works correctly in all the corner cases is a little bit.
So if that fails, then he will propose at the end of 2-round wait, right? Then he will have the certified block parent, right?
Yeah. That's true. If I'm forwarding to the next leader, but if I'm proposing directly to the next leader, but that next leader is say crashed, then I just wasted that's not going to help me. But then whoever the next leader, but anyway, okay, fine, yeah, cool. All right. Well, maybe you want to get in touch after this, and
Yes.
if you feel like it, I don't know. It's up to you.
Yeah.
You can
write something.
I don't know if we've been in touch by email before, but you can.
Yeah,
find
we
it.
have like chatted a lot about high range. Yeah, right.
Oh, you're on the you're oh that's right. So I thought I was getting confused, but you're the one of the co-authors on hydrangea, right?
Right.
Oh, so we had some we had some conversations, right? Exactly. Okay, cool. Yeah, I haven't been able to get back to look at the latest. After we had some conversations, then you guys did some updates, and I hadn't had time to review what those look like. But yeah.
Awesome. Maybe we can get back. We still have like 10 minutes for questions. I know, Dalton, I think I would have loved for you to ask your question that we've been chatting about, if you're still up for it.
Yeah.
Dalton, what do you think?
What's the what?
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry. I was curious of your so you know how in Simplex, right, we can have a when we have a cert block certificate and a timeout, the next leader could fairly point to the block certificate of that previous round. I think in your previous slide it'd be round 4, and then the next finalization could then implicitly finalize this, right? Is this the same in Kudzu? Are we guaranteed, or does this extra round of voting guarantee us either a finalization or a nullification or a timeout cert?
You mean you can't have both? You want to maintain the invariant that you can't have. Yeah, I mean that's what in Kudzu you have to. That's the main thing about Kudzu that makes it tricky, right? So you want to ensure that in no slot can you have a timeout certificate form and any kind of finalization certificate, either a fast path or a normal finalization certificate. That's like critical, because otherwise the rules are the same. You still have the same skip rule where you're only allowed to build on a block in the past if you have all the intervening timeout certificates. So that all is still this. That's all the same in Kudzu.
But what's been complicating an implementation of ours with Simplex is the fact that the finalization certificate of a block that we end up finalizing isn't guaranteed. Right? Like we could end up finalizing something that doesn't have a finalization certificate. Because
let's go back here. Right. So you mean implicit finalization like this, where
I guess what would make it more. Well, I guess in round 2 here, there must be a timeout cert, or else we would have never skipped it, right?
Nobody skipped this.
Well, it skipped finalization.
It didn't get finalized, right? Oh, well, that might just mean that happens because, maybe some people did vote to, a few parties might have voted to timeout, but not enough to get a timeout certificate, but enough to prevent you from getting a finalization certificate, because you don't vote for a finalization certificate if you voted for a timeout, right? So you could easily get like F+1 honest parties. Well, to get a finalization certificate, right, you might need all 2 F+1 honest parties to vote to finalize, because the adversary maybe is not going to vote for any finalization certificates, right? So if any one of those honest parties voted to timeout, you're not going to be able to get a finalization certificate. So just one honest party votes to timeout for whatever reason, he was getting the messages a little bit slowly than everybody else, then that will prevent you from getting a finalization certificate, but yet you might not ever get a timeout certificate either. That party who voted to timeout will eventually then see that certified block, and that's all anybody will ever see.
So, but even still, like in this diagram we have up now, it would be valid for this leader to point to the block certificate in 4, right?
Oh yeah.
Round 5.
Oh, he didn't have to skip over any of these slots, right? He could have built on this block. This guy here, you mean?
Yeah. Yep.
He could have built on this block. He could have built on this block. but he couldn't build on this block, assuming that no timeout certificate is forming here.
I see. I see. And this is the same in Kudzu, right? We have these implicit finalizations.
Yeah.
Interesting. So Dalton, I thought you were going to have, so maybe, okay, another dumb question for me. So comparing these kinds of protocols to, just the kind of like Tendermint or PBFT that just finalized, these slots are kind of always 3 rounds of, actually one thing I don't know, are these rounds of small deltas or big deltas? Or?
No, they're all little, it's all, what's the word people use? Optimistically responsive. Yeah.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. So they're all little 2 deltas. Yeah. Only the big deltas, or you only get a big delta for timeouts. But when everything is going smoothly, you just move on. And yeah. So right, every slot is really 2 delta, and then half of the next slot is just spent waiting to get that finalization. There is like this overlapping pipelining going on. So the block time is 2 delta. Every 2 delta, somebody should be able to propose. But then when somebody proposes, the next proposal will go in time 2 delta, but then it'll take another delta before that first proposal is finalized.
I see. And so my question was, like, in these other protocols, I guess you just have inside a round, inside a round, you can have like infinite amount of slots. But if you're not finalizing, you're just gonna keep like trying until you actually finalize. And so you can't have like these missed slots. Whereas these kinds of responsive protocols, like, so I guess going back all the way, why do you say Simplex is such a beautiful protocol? Why is it simpler? Why did it take this long to kind of come out?
Why is it simple? I mean, just look at the view change protocol for PBFT. I mean, PBFT is simple until you start to look at the view change protocol, and then it's a horrible mess. So, and then because there is, either you say in Simplex there is no view change protocol, or it's like so simple, you might just, it's so trivial that you can afford to rotate leaders in every round. Whereas in PBFT, it's a very complicated and expensive. It's expensive just quantitatively, and it's also complicated and prone to errors, bugs in the implementation, and yeah. So
right, but at least you get your finality, right? Every slot.
Are you saying there's some type of finality you're not getting here?
Well, here you could just never finalize, right? You can have these like the second slot.
Well, I mean, none of these protocols, you might not ever finalize anything in any of these protocols. I mean, if your assumptions about
okay
are not
fair enough. So I guess this goes back to the argument what Dalton kind of pointed out to me. I think someone asked you in your previous thing towards the end that the difference here and the other is kind of just the RAM requirements, because here you have to keep for all of these slots that as you're moving forward.
Yeah, that came up with that talk that was recorded, right? But since, yeah. So since that time, afterwards, I talked to some people and I thought about this some more. And I also think that's just like it's a bit of a red herring, because even in these other protocols, like they're saying that there's not this state that you have to keep track of. That like somehow they're saying in this protocol there's some unbounded amount of state. But I claim that all of that state is unbounded in these other protocols as well, simply because at some level in your protocol stack, you're going to have closer to the communication layer. There are still messages that are being transmitted and need to be retransmitted and buffered until you get acknowledgements. And all of that's state as well. It's just not like explicit state in the protocol. It's like in all of those protocols too. And you could have like leaders that keep failing over in PBFT. And for each of those, there are some messages that you're sending. And you can never really, unless you until you hit the next checkpoint where you finalize something and can checkpoint, somebody has to remember all those messages you sent and keep trying to retransmit them to maintain the eventual delivery assumption, the eventual delivery rules that you have for these protocols. If I transmit a message and I'm honest, then that message has to be delivered to all honest parties. And in all these protocols, this is a whole nother issue that I think deserves closer attention, is in all these protocols, there's this assumption that all messages will eventually be delivered, and you have to have some mechanism in place to do some checkpointing and garbage collection. So I'm saying even if the protocol itself can somehow stop keeping track of those messages, and they're not explicitly in your database of tracked of objects that you're keeping track of, until you hit your next checkpoint, I would think all of those messages that you've sent in every epoch that failed, or every view that failed, have to stay around until you recover.
And I think they kind of live in the network and they keep living there. I guess what I was saying. Maybe that's true.
I don't think so. I mean, I think, well, now we're getting in. These are the kind of things I'd like to really talk to people who actually implement this stuff. I've worked with people who do implement this stuff in the past few years, and I think I have a better view of how this stuff works now, and have even helped them design some protocols in this space. But things don't live in the network. I mean, it depends. I'm not assuming any kind of gossip network here. I'm just assuming simple point-to-point. In that model, if you're assuming simple point-to-point, then you have to hold any message you want to transmit has to be buffered and stored. And assuming you don't get all NX for it, you're going to have to store it until you hit some checkpoint and you realize it's safe to garbage collect all those protocol messages that you sent. Otherwise, there's no easy way to do this. And my claim is that for these other protocols like PBFT, even though they don't have explicit things that they're tracking, they have things that they're implicitly tracking at another step. So the memory thing, I don't buy. But it would be nice to have that conversation at a deeper level of detail, because I'm not sure if I'm missing something there or not in terms of how there's some other trick in PBFT you can exploit. I think for these protocols too, from my experience with working with people who actually implement this stuff, what you end up doing is, like, if you're not finalizing any blocks, you have lots of problems, not just running out of memory, but and I think in practice, what people do, right, is they play games, like they start dynamically increasing the timeout parameter until they start getting finalizations. At least that's when I worked before I was at Offchain. I was at Dfinity. They built this internet computer thingy. It was a very well engineered project, by the way, even if they kind of failed as a business. But that's the kind of thing I learned from them. That's a standard thing too, right? This doubling up of timeouts. But yeah, yeah.
In the Telegram group, we have Adi, who's built like a Malachite, and he was at Informal System building Tendermint for a while. So maybe if you join, we could maybe continue the discussion there. I'd be curious to.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to understand these things better myself too. Yeah.
Awesome. I don't know if there's any more last minute questions. We're already 5 minutes over the 30-minute mark, but this has been really fun.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This was fun. Quick question under heavy network jitter, fast and slow paths lead to excessive slot skipping. How does this protocol ensure high data utilization in such a okay? But I think this is like similar to the question we were just talking about, right? If you start getting just nothing but time, if you start getting like too much, if your network starts falling apart, then you might just start issuing nothing but timeout certificates. And then, yeah, I think what would happen in PBFT? In PBFT, you just keep failing over from one view to the next view, running the view change protocol over and over and over again. And I'm not sure, but I don't think you can just garbage collect. So in every view change protocol, there's lots of messages being sent, yada, yada, yada. And I don't know that it's safe to garbage collect any of those messages that you've sent until such time as you can checkpoint. I mean, that's the way I thought I understood how PBFT worked, is that, you get to a checkpoint where you know that everybody's caught up. You just can do a state sync later, and you can just eliminate all the protocol messages that were sent. But happy to understand more of those issues at a deeper level. I have some ideas along those lines, but yeah. Okay, should we cut it? This was a lot of fun. I'm glad you guys invited me, and I'll be happy to join in on some future conversations and whatnot.
Awesome. Patrick, are you still open to doing a mini-mint next, or maybe after the holidays? Or
Yeah, I was thinking after the holidays probably makes sense. I think attendance will be up and down over the next few weeks if we do it again. I think right now we'd be tracking for like the few days after Christmas.
I met you at Berkeley, right? Is that?
Yeah, we were talking actually about that unbounded memory
We were talking about exactly
conversation.
the
Yeah,
issue, right?
someone asked you a question, we couldn't find who asked you, and then we talked about it instead.
Yeah, but I don't know if you know enough about this stuff to say whether what I'm saying is correct or not in terms of how PBFT would handle the situation in terms of if you just
I think
or what happens. Aren't you also?
I think the weird thing you kind of have to think about is in the PBFT thing, you kind of have this like high watermark that forms during each round before you move to the next height.
Mm-hmm.
And if you move to that high watermark, even if there are skips, that can be a smaller amount of data to hold in RAM. Not talking about message delivery at all. Like I totally agree that there's unbounded time there and like how you rebroadcast stuff. But I think in terms of like the internal state in the consensus mechanism, like machine itself that you've designed, I have, at least in code, have found it easier to actually do that. Like in terms of like RAM usage than what Simplex requires, which is just many, many nullifications over time. Because you can't really have a high watermark on the nullification set. Still prefer it.
But do you think what I'm saying about this hidden memory that's being used just in the network, in the transmission layer? I mean, you can't.
I kind of consider that the same, all else equal. I think what I was only thinking about is really just the storage in like the actual like consensus state machine that is required to verify the next proposal. That's what I think, that at least how I was thinking about the comparison. But yeah, on the network layer, like Simplex is nice because you don't have to rebuffer anything, right? Like it's just kind of like you send certificates out, you store them, like send more certificates out, but like you can't really prune anything below or above the last finalized round when you implement it. And so you can store those nullifications just on disk. So like it doesn't actually end up being unbounded RAM if you really want to get good with it. So I ultimately concluded it's kind of like it doesn't really matter in practice because you can just store those on disk if you have like 5 million nullifications that you can't get rid of. So it ends up being some unbounded storage though.
Nullifications, you mean like timeout certificates?
Yeah.
Or I see. And also then you might have just blocks, like these kind of blocks here that are like that haven't been finalized either. You got to remember all of those too, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we discussed, I think, which we still have an open issue for, and we actually dabbled with, is that if you have like a threshold Simplex instance, you can like combine the nullifications in a cool way using like basically aggregate over threshold signatures.
Right. We talked about that. So you implemented something, I think, since we talked then, I guess.
Yeah, we played around with it. We ultimately decided just to kind of put it on ice for now because it in practice just isn't something you really run into.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Right. I think, long story short, I think there's probably more conversation to be had around like kind of what the real storage or RAM usage is of these different protocols in different ways. We have not really thought about it much since that conversation.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, great to see you again.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll sign off here.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.